Mr. Crane, in your written testimony, you discussed nearly $7 billion in excise tax payments since the Pittman-Robertson program began. This is obviously a significant amount of money that goes directly to states to run their fish and game departments and to implement local conservation programs. In fact, some have suggested that this money had a direct impact on the recovery of populations such as the white-tailed deer, the black bear, and the American elk. If we do not clarify the law by enacting Section 2 of this legislation, what effect will that have on the conservation dollars paid into the Pittman-Robertson account, and how will that affect overall state conservation programs?
Mr. Chairman, we are very proud of this uniquely American system, as you pointed out. It's a system of those of us that hunt and fish, the industries that manufacture this pay the taxes, and everyone else benefits from it. $7 billion is a lot of money even in this town, and so we're very proud of the accomplishments that this system has. By unnecessarily putting an agency that doesn't have the authority, doesn't have the ability, has declined to take these petitions in the past and run that risk that somehow somebody will petition this in the future and basically break this financial model, I think we're going to do a tremendous disservice to conservation in America. And I would encourage this committee to leave this provision intact. I think that these issues are much better handled by the state wildlife agencies and those professionals that can deal with them when they rarely occur on a much more localized basis.
So the Section 2 provisions you're supportive of?
Yes, sir.
Great. Let me continue with you, Mr. Crane. If a situation occurs where sound science irrefutably identifies a population impact from lead-based ammunition, as was the case with waterfowl, do you think that the government has a role to play in responding? And if so, what would be that kind of role?
I absolutely do. Again, I think the right agencies to handle that are the state wildlife management authorities and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Where these happen, they have the tools in their toolkit to be able to handle things like season length, like areas that they may have to temporarily close, and other ways to address this. There are no population-wide issues with lead contamination on any species in the United States, save maybe the California condor, and that's got a very long history, and I'd take up too much time talking about it.
How about you, Mr. Hall, on that issue? I know you must have experience from your previous directorship, Fish and Wildlife.
I agree with that. I think if it's endemic, if it's all over the United States and crosses state boundaries, and we have an issue like we did with lead shot for waterfowl hunting, then there's a very appropriate role for the federal agency to play. That has not come to bear in any science that I've seen dealing with lead since we shut down the use of lead shot for waterfowling. Therefore, I agree completely that a proper place to do that is where it is locally found. Condor might be an example in California and Arizona. Let the state agencies address it. That's the proper role of the state agencies, and I would agree with that. And if I might, I want to correct just a procedural point that Mr. Pacelli made, and that is that we can't compare apples and oranges when we're talking bears and lions. Under the polar bear, it is a United States species. Therefore, it's protected in Alaska and other places. It's one of our species. So when it was listed as threatened, it was listed as a domestic species listed. If a lion were listed, or some species that is not domestic to the United States, then it will go on the international list of threatened and endangered species, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service particularly would defer to the origin country from where the animal was coming on what rules they wanted us to implement. If they had permits from there, we'd be able to let them come in. But so thank you for allowing me to clarify the procedure there.
Let me ask a follow-up question with you. You talked about the NACA, and I mentioned in my opening statement about the private matching money that far exceeds the federal investment. But help us explain, help some of my constituents to understand, you know, if this is the case, why not shift all the funding to the private sector? What happens if there's no federal investment? And, you know, what should the responsibility of the U.S. taxpayer be in this regard, particularly, as I mentioned, in a time of very austere federal budgets?
You know, thank you for that question. It's a legitimate question that citizens need to really understand. When we look at the North American model of wildlife management and conservation that Jeff referred to a few minutes ago, that is a partnership. It goes back to Aldo Leopold's concept of the citizen conservationist, and that's why we and the private sector are so willing to stand up and put money into the system. But that needs to have the partnership of the federal government relaying that this is a United States value. Our natural resources are something important to us as a country, us as a people, and by this small token, you know, we really 1/4 of the under NAWCA is what is spent by the federal taxpayer. They get $4 back for $1 expended. As we look at good governance, as we look at efficient governance, I can't think of a program that better exemplifies the federal taxpayer getting more back for the resources they own by Constitution and the management of those resources than something that gives them back a $4 payoff for $1 investment.
Great. Thank you for that.